welcome to today's Still Standing conversation. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Kendra Baidu, and I'm the co-founder of Still Standing Retreats, and I'll be your moderator today. And in this episode, we're joined by Michelle Williams. She's an outreach worker with 15 years experience in mental health and addictions. And we're going to talk about the fine line between healthy coping and harmful dependence. And we'll uncover how grief can make us vulnerable to addiction. But more importantly, we're going to look at how to recognize and break free from those patterns that might keep us stuck. So you're really in for a good conversation today. And let's dive in. But before we dive in, we're going to talk about a bit of a disclaimer, right? So while everyone on today's call is sharing their expertise, we have to remember that our conversation is general. And if something hits home and you need personal support, please reach out for that, okay? We can't guarantee any outcomes or be responsible for any decisions based on this discussion. It's just a space for open conversation. But sometimes you need tailored support. And if you need support for your individual needs, go and get it. Take care of yourself, and it's absolutely okay to go and get that support. It's also important that we acknowledge that we're on the traditional unceded territories of Indigenous people across Canada, and we're going to honor their enduring relationship with the land. And we're going to remember that our Indigenous communities have been demonstrating the importance of balance, the importance of wisdom, the importance of looking for those healthy ways of moving through life. And let's move forward in our conversation with gratitude for that contribution that they have made and the privilege that we have to be having this conversation on their land. So here we go. We're on it. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Kendra.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to know, I think a great way for us to get started is maybe to ask you, why you wanted to speak with us today about addictions and grief.
Wow.
Big
So,
question.
yeah, it is. It's a great question to start with. And to provide you with a full, robust answer, I feel like it's really important to address both my work and my personal life. So, as an outreach worker, I work in, as you mentioned before, mental health and addictions. I have some experience in working with people with I have clients who struggle with substance use disorder, or they are well on their way to having substance use disorder. So I'm quite well versed in that area. A lot of my work is centered around addictions and substance use, and also with people who are struggling in different areas of their lives. So that could be with mental illness, and it could be with grief, and it could be both. It could also be that um, sometimes people who are struggling with mental illness might even be grieving a life that they had in the past,
Mhm.
and they are coping with substance use now. Um, yeah, I think grief probably looks quite different for everyone. The process looks different, the timeline looks different, the reasons look different. And so I frequently help people through areas of grief in their life. And as I said, I assist them with managing, reducing, or completely abstaining from substance use.
Yeah.
If they're struggling with that. And even personally, I have personal reasons for wanting to be here. I've had experiences with grief. Um, I would say some maybe they were more intense experiences than others. Um, some of them involved, well, there, like when I was much younger, I was a teenager when I had a parent pass away. So I experienced like grief in a more common way that people understand grief to be. So with the loss of someone in death, but even just in job loss, a job loss that I had probably 7 or 8 years ago now, was so heartbreaking for me. There was so much grief around that job loss that um, I even marvel at how I think I grieved that losing that position was it was an earth-shattering experience.
Mhm.
And even things like personal experiences like my children moving out of home
Yeah.
feels like I'm about I'm about to go through some empty nesting, and there's been a process, like we're on the third one who's on her way out, and a
Mhm.
whole bunch of other things are happening in my life right now where I feel like I have a lot of predictable grief that's coming. I feel like I'm bracing for change.
Yes.
And so with all that, knowing I have some professional experience and some personal experience with grief and some professional experience with helping people through addiction and even just knowing that there have been times where I've used alcohol when I was feeling a loss or feeling low or like which seemed like a reasonable thing to be doing at the time. And so it felt like I can see where these two things can be married, and how one impacts the other in both directions.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to be here to contribute a little bit more to this conversation.
Thanks so much for that, Michelle. And you're right. I mean, there's the professional piece, and I'm so glad that you shared that so that we can all get to know a little bit about what you do to help people as just part of your career, helping people to move through addiction, regardless of how they've arrived at a space where they're looking for that help. But your personal experience for you to be able to recognize, okay, so grief um, has those very uh, it can feel big regardless of the origin of this grief. It can be the loss of someone who we treasure, like our parent or our child, you know, but it also, or our spouse, right? But it
Yeah.
also can be change.
Yes.
And loss of a spouse can just be um, a change in the marriage, and now you're not married. And what are we grieving there? Or it can be like you say, with empty nesting and that
Mm,
change, and who am I now? We were always define ourselves as that role that we were playing with our children in the house. Now they're gone. So um how are you seeing, what are you seeing as the ways that addiction can kind of show up, uh, regardless of the source of the grief? Like, are you noticing that it's different depending on the kind of grief that is motivating
hmm. I'm
you?
I, yeah, I'm not sure it's necessarily different. Um, and when I think of my work and the clients that I have who struggle with substance use, um, if I teased apart, like short of them saying, if they were to say, this horribly traumatic thing happened and I'm grieving, we would know for sure that there is grief in there. And for those of my clients who have not said that, I would say if I teased it apart enough, I'm sure I could find an element of grief somewhere in their past. Um, but what I can identify as a pretty common theme is how the substance use acts as a numbing agent
Mhm.
for that feeling that we don't want to feel.
Yes.
Um, so I would say that addiction or substance use, or even substance use disorder, plays a role in grief in that way, in that we are looking to feel better.
Mhm.
So the effects, I think, of the positive effects that we would feel from using substances when we feel kind of crummy due to the grief is the very um, it helps us feel better, but it also blocks the grieving process. It
Mhm.
stops the grief from unfolding.
Mhm.
So, and then then when we have uh, untreated or unprocessed grief, we can end up with even bigger issues or more psychological distress that probably will either be self-medicated again by using substances, or you may need to get therapeutic treatment
Mhm.
to help process the grief and resolve some of that distress. Did I
So
answer the
we, yeah, you did. And basically what you said is um, addiction often, if you peel back the layers of addiction, you will see that there's usually some element of grief underneath
There
the.
certainly can be, yeah. And I should be clear in saying that not all addiction, not every person who has substance use disorder necessarily is grieving or has grieved, but possibly if you teased it apart enough, you would find where that you might find elements of grief for sure.
Yeah, especially when we're looking at grief through the multiple ways that grief can show up. And
Absolutely.
And in looking at that, the various ways that grief can show up, I think it's important that we also make the distinction that today we're not only talking about addiction to substances, but there's addiction can show up in so many different ways as we're trying to cope, especially when we're grieving. There's, um, sugar is one of the most addictive
Yeah.
one of the most addictive and one of the most accepted things for us to engage in, right?
Yeah.
Um,
And I would even say it's funny you mention it that way too, because I was speaking to someone recently who was telling me about their separation and divorce. And this had happened quite some time ago, years and years ago. And that person said to me, I threw myself into my work,
yeah.
like just threw myself.
Mhm. Yes.
If I was awake, I was working. So, and I would even say that that probably acted as a bit of a numbing agent. Um, didn't have to process any of that grief.
Yes. Yeah. And in our previous still standing conversations, we've talked about, and with others, we've talked about how the grieving process has, for each of us, it has its own rhythm and flow that we need to follow. Because when we try to block it, it's like rushing water. And if you try to
Yeah,
block it, it will find a way to seep through, or maybe the pressure will build and it'll come out in a big way that we weren't prepared for. And so blocking it doesn't stop it. It just interrupts what is the inevitable, which is the flow of grief that we need to kind of move through. And so what you said earlier about how the things that we lean into, like overwork or the sugar or the the any of the things that anything that gives us that dopamine hit can be something that we become addicted to.
Yes, absolutely.
And if we're looking at it that way, all we're
Yeah,
doing is interrupting that natural flow.
absolutely. Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned the bit about the dopamine too, because in one of the groups that I run, as a part of my work, we do a whole session on some neurobiology. Once your brain has become addicted to a substance or anything, and we talk a lot about how your brain develops its own amount of dopamine. And when you start introducing substances that will also increase the dopamine and you get a dopamine hit, your brain reduces the production of dopamine because it starts to expect the dopamine hit from whatever substance you're
Okay, I'm
using.
going to stop us right here because now we've started to talk about dopamine, but we haven't actually defined it for anybody who's maybe not familiar. So do you want to give a quick sentence or two about what dopamine is and the role that it plays?
Yeah, so dopamine is a really happy chemical in our brain that anytime we do anything really reinforcing, our brain will release dopamine and it makes us happy, really. So, for instance, any if you're on your phone and people have notifications on their phone, most people leave notifications on because they hear a ding or a buzz or a ring or something. And every time that comes in, we get a dopamine hit. It feels good. Someone's trying to reach us. I get a lot of dopamine hits every time I cross something off a to-do list. Actually, apparently a lot of people get that dopamine hit, but I really love to-do lists. So I make my list so long just so I can cross them off different ways because
Have you ever done the thing where you finish something and it wasn't on a list, but then you'll write it on the list just so
I
you can
do, just
cross
so I can
it
cross
off?
it off. Yeah, all the time.
Done that, yeah.
Just want to feel better. Put more things on that list I've already done.
Mhm.
Yeah, guilty. Um, yes. So because we love that great feeling, love getting a dopamine hit. Um, when we are using any substance, it gives us a dopamine hit, makes us feel better. So we get hit with it. All this dopamine gets produced in our brain from the substance. So our brain stops or reduces the amount of dopamine it's developing. So, with that, this is just a quick fun fact. I don't even have to get into this for too long. But when we start using a substance and we get a regular dopamine hit from that substance, and then we decide to stop using the substance or even slow it down, our dopamine lowers because we're not getting the substance anymore that's giving us the dopamine, and then we feel not so great. We call that withdrawal. But our body is just really unhappy, and that's why we want to keep going back to it. We just want to feel better.
That substance
Yeah.
can be whatever we're addicted
Yeah.
to.
Sugar. Like I love sugar. And you know how we say like if people go on diets or if they reduce sugar or something like that, or carbs, whatever it is that you really just love eating, first 3 days you just feel like a bear. It's because you're not getting that hit. So yeah, it could really be anything. Caffeine. I am miserable without it. I love caffeine so much. I go to bed at night thinking about my morning coffee.
Okay, so I like that you've brought up, let's say caffeine, because so many of us drink coffee every day and we're well aware that we're addicted to this caffeine. But um what what is like how can we tell when a coping mechanism
Yeah.
becomes an addiction or becomes problematic? Like how can we know that, all right, yes, I'm throwing myself into work because that's what I need to do right now. When does that become something that um, is a problem for us, or the sugar, or the caffeine, or the alcohol, or whatever it is that we're doing?
So typically, we would say that it becomes problematic when it is impairing to our daily functioning. Um, slight, slight caveat there with if you are, some people would say, I've heard people say, I'm a functioning alcoholic. So some people could actually say, but I still function. And you do, but your body's not functioning very well. You're managing, really. You're managing to get through the day. You're managing to get the task done relatively well, but probably not with a lot of ease. And we have numbers that determine like what happens if you're consuming too much of something that's not good. Your body will start to tell you that it's not doing well, even if you're functioning well. So, but overall, I would say that the rule of thumb is if it's impairing your daily functioning, there it's more problematic than just occasional usage to help you feel a little bit better. Um, Also, there is just a diagram that we use sometimes in when we work with people who struggle with substance use, and we talk a lot about drifting. And this is typically for people who are in recovery.
Yes.
And a space of drift is the space that you are before you actually slip or relapse. So things are not going very well. You're drifting from where you need to be. The only reason why I'm bringing that up is because um, I think we can liken this example to when we think that there might be a problem. So in talking about drift, we people have typically already acknowledged that um, they have a substance use disorder or some form of addiction, and so they may be in some sort of recovery, and so we teach them the signs of their drift. But I would also say that these signs would be similar when you are trying to like if you're trying to determine if there is problematic behavior, you would
Mhm.
probably look at this. So the symbol that we have, and usually I do a little sketch or something, but I pulled out a couple of, I found a drawing that I really like. So I'm just gonna show you this. I don't know if you can see it. If you
Yeah.
can't, I will share it with you. I will explain it. So there's
Oh, yes, we can see it
a
now. Yeah.
sailboat.
So
Yeah.
it's a
Uh,
boat that says RCVRM on it. And then
yeah.
there's
And
healthy
so,
eating, fun activities, rest and
yeah.
exercise. What else? What's
Yeah.
therapy and feelings, I think?
Yeah. And so these here, that this is supposed to be recovery. So if you're in recovery, and you're on your boat and you want to stay floating and you want to stay anchored. So these are anchors. And the words here that are anchoring the boat and stopping the boat from drifting are the things in your life. So they don't have to be these exact words, but they're the things in your life that you might identify as the things that keep you well balanced. So with the clientele that I work with, I might say, okay, like let's just talk about what works for you. And so some of them will say, I know I'm doing well when I'm going to my regular meetings, or I don't miss my doctor's appointment, or my kids get into their ballet lesson on time. They're getting to their ballet lesson, period. Like they can identify these very personal things that tell them, I'm doing well, I am managing well, I am good. And I would say that if if you know what your life looks like and you can feel that good feeling, like you know that you're on track. So you might be grieving, and that feeling is not great, never is. But if you feel even worse because the way that you are choosing to cope is impairing your life in an unhealthy way, or it's impairing your life, it will be unhealthy. And you start to see the things that keep you anchored slowly disappear. You're not engaging with social, you don't have good social relationships anymore because you're not engaging. You're struggling to get to work because of the addiction. You are struggling to get your kid to school. You're missing appointments. Your answering machine's full. Your parents can't reach you. Like all these different things start happening. Those are really clear signs that Now your substance use is impacting your daily functioning.
Mhm.
And so if someone's already in recovery, we would say, okay, these are your signs. Like you know this already. But if someone has not yet hit a place where they feel like the substance is impacting them, where they would say, I have a problem, they might start to notice these things happen. So it would be a flag. These would be flags, we would say, or anchors. You're losing your anchors. Your anchors are disappearing. You're going to be drifting soon.
I really like that, kind of giving a visual of what we can look at to kind of identify, okay, so when I'm doing well, these are the habits, these are the routines, this is what my life looks like when I'm doing well. But here
Mm-hmm.
I have something tricky to ask because when we're in the midst of grief,
Mm.
a lot of those anchors can be disrupted. Being
Yes.
able to interact the way we would, the social, being
Mm-hmm.
social, being getting people to things on time, getting out of bed. Sometimes, sometimes we could just be so racked with grief that we're not even able to kind of get up and do things. Um, and so these coping mechanisms can be things that we're reaching for so that we can have access to these
Mm-hmm.
anchors to
Yeah.
some people might say when I'm doing well, my house is tidy. I'm able to keep my home the way that I want to keep it. And then you look and you say, "Oh, my house is not clean. Let me let me reach for a coping, whatever that coping mechanism is, so that I have the energy and the clarity of mind and the focus to be able to do some of these things." Um,
Mm.
so that it can be tricky, can't it? To
Yeah.
understand like what you need to
Tease
do.
apart which is doing what.
That's right.
For sure. So I think I have a couple of thoughts around that. Um, First, with grief, um, there's no timeline for grief. I feel like you've probably covered that in previous episodes, but there isn't a timeline for grief, but there is a general timeline for the initial intensity of grief. And typically, we'd say anywhere between like at somewhere around the 6 month mark, grief becomes ideally around 6 months, a little less intensive.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean you're not grieving anymore, but the intensity of that initial grief would lessen a little bit. And some people it takes longer. It could be 9 months and could be like 2 years,
Mhm.
but it starts to settle a little bit. And so probably during that, I would say during that really intense time, yeah, your house might be a disaster.
Mhm.
And I could be wrong. There could be this person out there, but I have also never heard of someone say, and I reach for a substance, and between the grief and the substance, I can then keep my house clean. Like those two don't go together and help you get somewhere else.
So
Um,
maybe not a substance, but if your addiction is like you're a workaholic and you're lean like you're the person you referenced earlier who's leaning into
mhm,
work. And so that really looks like depending on what stage of being a workaholic you're in, it can actually look very, very helpful, very like you're coping very well.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I'm just it just seems it's hard to it seems like it would be hard to understand exactly when
yeah,
something goes from being helpful to harmful,
yeah. And
especially if we're
so,
not looking at things like alcohol and drugs, which um,
mhm,
our society has a lot of language around.
yeah. And I think too, Kendra, it's a really good point you're making. I would say too to that person. So let's just take my friend for example, who thrown themselves into work and she appeared to be doing really well. because she was just working so much and doing really good work and looked like she was feeling great, though she probably wasn't. Um, After a period of time, I think if I knew anyone who worked that much, all of like if this went on for years, I might actually say, hmm. So they might think, do you do anything else? And so yeah, I think at some point probably they might also start to hear other people say,
Mhm.
you're working an awful lot and it's been going on for a really long time. How are things
So,
going?
so is that one of the things then that you'd recommend that we kind of have a circle of people who know us and that we trust? They're looking out for our well-being, and then we pay attention to their feedback on.
Absolutely. And that's also something we discuss in treatment. We talk about what what's the feedback we're getting? What are our close people? What's our circle of supports giving to us, saying to us? What are they telling us? And in fact, when we do assessments for substance use disorders, one of the questions that we ask is, do you think you have a problem, or has anyone ever indicated to you that you might have a problem with this substance?
Right.
So even if you think you don't, by adding the bit, or has anyone else ever suggested that you might have a problem? Like, because they might disagree with that entirely. But if other people and even more than one person is concerned, it's just something to be aware of.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh,
Hmm.
wow. So, um, what are some practical ways then that people can cope? Like you talked about some things that we reach for that are that can be maladaptive. What can we do that's really highly recommended and we should, especially when we're grieving, if we reach for these things, we're gonna thrive.
So, I mean, grief. So grief, it's a part of life. It's something that's we're all going to experience. If we haven't yet, we will. And maybe even if you think you haven't, you might have, and you didn't realize. Maybe you didn't have the language for it. You didn't realize that grieving could look different and could happen for different reasons other than what we might consider to be the stereotype of grief. So someone passes away and we're grieving versus someone lost a job, like you lose a job, but you're grieving it. You lose your spouse. You're no longer married. You're grieving that. Your children move out of the house. You're grieving a full home. Um, so it's important to remember that that's totally normal and that people cope differently. There are some healthy and unhealthy ways of coping, but healthier things that we really might want to think about is first to be compassionate towards yourself when you're in a time of grief. First, I think actually being compassionate towards having self compassion is really important, whether you're grieving or not. But I would say when you are grieving, when you are experiencing some really big feelings around the loss of something or someone, it's really important to be self compassionate. And research has even shown that there are three areas in self compassion
Oh, this
that
is interesting. We're always going on about self-compassion
really,
here, and I can't wait to hear about these three areas. Tell us.
yeah. So they talk about three areas that are really important in self compassion. One of them is self kindness. So to express love to yourself, towards yourself, and acceptance towards yourself, in the like where you are in that period of grief and what you can or cannot be doing or can accomplish or get done during that time. So being kind towards yourself is one of the first ones. Um, Practicing mindfulness would be a second one. So any mindfulness practice would be very helpful during a time of grief. And I feel like generally, when I start talking about mindfulness, people might start thinking of meditative practices, which is one way to be mindful. It's certainly not the only way to be mindful. Mindfulness is really focusing on one thing at a time. It's really the art of mindfulness. So, which can be very difficult in our very busy society to be focused on only one thing at a time. Um, but even doing something as simple as using your breath to focus and relax can be very mindful. Sometimes I tell clients when you're doing the dishes, if you're doing any dishes by hand, just do the dishes. Just focus on the cloth on the dish, rinsing the plate. I think people are pleasantly surprised when they feel their whole selves calm down. And it's one way of practicing self-compassion is to be mindful.
Okay.
And the third thing is connectedness. So, um, and by connectedness, I mean connected to yourself, connected to other people, connected to other beings, anything that's alive. So, from connecting with longtime friends to family to your neighbor who needs help shoveling the driveway to the earth and getting your hands dirty and gardening, like
Yes.
just connected to any living thing you can connect with is
Michelle, our very last still standing conversation was about nature and how we spend time in nature. And people were saying exactly that. Like when you go out into nature, these are living beings. The trees are living beings, the flowers are living beings, and that can be something to connect with. And I think that's really important because when we're grieving, sometimes we want a cocoon and we don't want, it's not a time where we want to be with a lot of people and maybe we're not ready to be having a lot of interaction. We don't have the energy for it. But connection can also be connection without people, it can be with a pet, it can be with, like you said, like nature or just getting into the gardening. And when you're gardening, to only just do the gardening, and then it can become a meditative. Uh,
absolutely all of these three, let's call them pillars of self-compassion. They all help to reduce stress. They all increase well-being and they all help with resilience and managing conflict.
okay.
So, the three pillars of self compassion
So
research,
kindness, meditation, and connection are
yeah,
the
self
three.
kindness, mindfulness practice doesn't have
Yeah.
to be meditation, but it can
Right.
be,
That's true. Yes.
and connectedness. Yeah.
Mhm. And and if we're kind of approaching coping through the lens of those three pillars, then
Hmm,
we're more likely um, to stay within the space of healthy coping rather
absolutely.
than things
Absolutely.
that harm us.
Yeah. And I would say too, really important to mention that these practicing self compassion is it's such a gift to yourself. And we touched on this at the beginning of this webinar, but I really just want to drive it home. If you are feeling like the amount of self compassion that you are able to practice is not enough,
Mhm.
and you are turning to any kind of addiction that is problematic,
Yeah.
and you feel you need help, please reach out to someone. Um, there is publicly funded help, there is private help you can get. Um, there are groups that you can join. There are all kinds of supports out there. So if you're feeling like practicing self compassion, recognizing that maybe your grief is too intense for too long, or even not too intense for too long, but just too intense, and you require some help, reach out to people. Even if it's that your circle of care, that's what we call it in health, your circle of
Mm.
care, your people. If it's your people, like reach out to your people, let them know that you're struggling and you need some help.
Okay. And I really like what you're saying about reaching out for help and looking at ways that you can have that support. Um, Before we go get into that, I just want to see if we have any questions from anyone. Folks, remember that at any time you can put a question in, or if you have a comment, you feel free to participate in that way. Um, I really am appreciative of you coming to talk to us today, Michelle, because when we're looking at uh, what coping can be, and we're looking at what grief can be, it's so much broader than what we generally refer to. And then when we look at what addiction can be,
Yeah.
right? Um, I just love that that there's kind of a way for us to kind of filter our coping and to say, okay, is what I'm doing right now, does that align with self-kindness? Does that align with mindfulness? Does that align with connection? And and that can help us to cope in a way that doesn't block the grief, because that's what the
Absolutely.
addiction does, is it blocks the processing of that grief, and that's not going to help us at all.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was a great summary of that.
Um, we do have a question. Someone's asking how families can support a loved one who is
Mm.
grieving without enabling addictive behaviors.
Hmm. So, um, before I answer that question, is that because the loved one does currently have addictive behaviors?
Mm, well, we can ask the attendee to elaborate on their question. What I'm seeing here is how a family can support, how you can offer support to someone who's grieving without promoting behavior that might be addictive.
So you can certainly talk about the pillars of self-compassion. Something else that we do talk about, um, actually, I help to run a group right now. It's with another community partner in Nova Scotia. That's where I practice. And this group is strictly for people who have loved ones who struggle with substance use. So whether your loved one has substance use disorder or they don't, and they are struggling with intensive grief, one thing that we talk about for you, who is supporting the other person, is your own self care. So, first, you really need to be caring for yourself. So, and we talk about the importance of doing at least one self care activity a week. And it can be anything. It could be reading a book, it could be going for a jog, it could be laying in a hammock, it could be a nothingness. It could be the act of doing nothing, also fine. I knew a fella who used to say, "Oh, I love that heart." Was that me? Or was that someone else who just put a heart there?
Someone put a
Whatever it
heart
was.
up for
A
you.
heart just flew up.
Someone was just
Love
loving what
that.
you were saying, Michelle.
Let's go with it. I knew a fellow who used to say, "I'm going to shave." And I think for him, that act of shaving was just made him, that was self care, made him feel really good. So when I say that, I think it's important first for you to be able to care for yourself so you can support the other person. I would also encourage you to talk to them about self care. So, what can they do to help care for themselves while they're going through this grieving process? So, again, it could be reading a book, going for a walk, getting up and movement. Like we really push for some kind of physical activity um, when you when you're having a hard time, when you're feeling low. And it doesn't have to be going to the gym. It could be go for a little stroll around the block. Um, if you change your behavior, you can help to alter your thoughts. Um, so, and that behavior can be your physical behavior, changing your action and changing your thoughts. We also say the opposite if we change our behavior. But in this particular circumstance, when we're helping someone through the grieving process, and it may not be when they are initially in the throes of initial grief, but when when they feel like they can move a little bit more, maybe it's encouraging some movement, encouraging eating well, encouraging good night's sleep, like getting all of those practices in, being connected,
Yes.
getting your hands dirty, talking to people, asking them about what their anchors are.
Mhm.
Remember that image with the boat? So like if you could bring up that kind of image, like what are your anchors? What helps you feel balanced and healthy and happy? And try to help assist them with anchoring themselves with those things. I think would be a really good start in helping someone um, through the grieving process and um, trying to not enable any kind of addictive behavior.
Yes. Yeah. That's really helpful. And I I like what you're saying around reaching for uh first of all, reaching for self-care for yourself so that you know what self-care even looks like so that you can help others with that. But but then to kind of um be a space where someone that you love can reach for self-care as well. All right. I think this is the time where we talk about our retreat that's coming up because you're saying how, there's all these ways that we can cope. One of the ways we can cope is by, finding a space where the focus is just on our care. And that's what the retreat is. We're still adding people to the wait list for the October 23rd to the 26th, 2025 retreat. And the Ontario's still standing. So we have retreats that we're going to be planning in other provinces eventually, but right now we've got Ontario, and the retreat in Ontario is held at Heron Lodge in Calabogie, Ontario. It's a lake and ski town outside of Ottawa. And Heron Lodge is a one-of-a-kind nature sanctuary that was featured in Log and Timber magazine and even used for movies. I know we just had a movie filmed there last month or a few weeks ago. And our team of wellness providers will guide you through gentle workshops and open discussions and peaceful outdoor activities and nutritious meals, all things that are wonderful ways to cope. Wonderful ways to cope. And everything is taken care of so that you can focus on your healing and personal growth. And the routines that you build throughout the retreat are then things that you can take with you into your routine at home afterward, and kind of as a reset to reconnect with what self-care looks like for you. To reconnect. And our next still standing fireside chat, our next conversation is on April 21st at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And in this episode, Keegan and Jess will be back. If you've been here for previous conversations, you'll know who Keegan and Jess are, and they're going to be talking to us about nutrition when grieving. And I think that it's just all of these topics all kind of fit with each other, How do we cope and healthily and try to avoid addiction, avoid things that block our healing? Well, what we eat and how we lean into ways of eating and foods that promote healing are all part of that. And what we'll want to do is, you can reach out to us through our social media. We're posting on Instagram all the time and on YouTube. That's where we put our recordings from these conversations. So all of the conversations that we've had to date are on our YouTube channel. And this conversation will be there in a few days once we're able to put it together and put it on there for you. And yeah, so find us on socials so that you can benefit from that connection throughout, in between our conversations. And I just want to thank you, Michelle, for sharing your insights today, for making time for us. I also want to thank our other team members for all of their work in bringing us together this evening. A special shout out to Kim. She's been taking care of your questions in the background and making sure the PowerPoint works as it's to work. And thanks to other members of our team. So Nirmal and Shivi from NS Social, they're the reason that we're posting on Instagram and doing all of those things. And an extra special shout out to Elizabeth Kelly and Mary Beth Sowerby for providing the platform that we're meeting on today. But most of all, thank you to you for your participation, for your thoughtful questions. Remember that grief is a personal journey. It's essential to honor your unique process. And grief is hard, but you can do hard things. You're still standing. You're here with us today. And the fact that you even took the time to come here shows yourself that you know how to lean into that self-compassion and that self-care. So thanks for being with us today, and we will see you on April 21st. Bye, everyone.